All right. Well, recording has already started. So hello, welcome to the SIG Release biweekly meeting. It is February 26th. This is a meeting that is recorded and on the internet, so please be mindful of what you're saying and adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. That said, we're going to start off with a release team update from Mike. So you want to take that away?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Nice. Awesome. I'm trying a new setup with my phone for audio, so hopefully I don't cut out if my internet cuts out. But so I took the notes yesterday at the release team meeting, so I want to go kind of role by role through each position and offer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so for people who are on the call, please make sure that you're adding yourself to the participants list. And for anyone who is interested in taking notes, feel free to sign up for that and drop some notes. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm just going to go kind of briefly through each of the roles and at least give my perspective on the things that are things that we should be like focusing, or things that are not concerning, but the ongoing things that are kind of interesting with each role, or that is noteworthy with each role, and some high-level statistics about that aspect of the release. And then, if we want to dive into any of them from there, I'm sure there are people that, are much more subject matter experts than me. So, great. So yeah, for enhancements, really quick, Claire's on the call too, but just really briefly for enhancements, there were 34 enhancements this week, which was 4 less than last week. 2 are from AWS out of tree. This sparked a whole interesting discussion on out of tree things in the release, both from the perspective of marketing, release notes, and all throughout the stack, really, which was interesting. But there were of the 34 enhancements slated for 114, 33 of them have a KEP, 1 doesn't have a KEP. This is due to an approved exception, and it will have a KEP. 15 of those enhancements are at risk due to missing test plans, and Maria, the CI signal lead, and Claire, the enhancements leads, are going to sync up on KEPs that may be especially unfortunate given that they don't have a test plan. So for CI signal, generally, there was a bit more turbulence this week, and the discussion for CI signal was mostly around we went through a bunch of the test grids, and there were some tests that were failing kind of repeatedly that we need to potentially crack down more on or follow up with the specific SIGs more. And we also went through discussing how failing tests should have issues in KK with either kind failing tests or flake labels. So we went through some of those and tried to just articulate expectations around which tests should have what kinds of labels, and making sure that everything is at least followed up with in that medium. Bug triage, kind of similarly, the topic, I feel like the main thing that we should be following up on with bug triage is it seems as though we're going into burn down. Right, yesterday was the start of burn down, final 4 weeks of the release. We have more release team meetings, and there are potentially too many. There are not enough issues in the milestone relating to some of the things that we're seeing, whether it's in the dashboards or what have you. So ideally, we're whittling down issues in the milestone throughout burn down, not adding them and then trying to whittle them down. So I think that's the main initiative over the next few days, should be making sure that we have an accurate assessment of all the issues in there. Test infra looks pretty good, looks pretty clean. Numbers of PRs merged are up this week, and that is kind of expected as code freeze is looming. Everyone's trying to merge more code in, and that's great. Docs also seems to be looking good. March 1st on Friday is the placeholder docs deadline, hoping to get like a pretty complete picture of the docs up by then, I believe, but it's crunch time for docs now, so fingers crossed. Release notes there's a lot of stuff happening with the release notes, which is great, near and dear to my heart. Jeff is going to talk about a lot of that, so I'll mostly skip this. Comms are also looking good. There was a bit of discussion with comms about certain out-of-tree features, trying to kind of get in on the release cycle to take advantage of the comms aspect of the release, which is, you know, as Aaron said, understandable. But as we kind of discussed, there are a number of ways for someone who manages a feature to advertise it in the same ways that we advertise the release, like the Kubernetes blog, without them necessarily having to take up bandwidth of people on the release team, like the docs lead or what have you, so the comms lead. So, you know, whenever possible, that is something that we should encourage folks to do, you know, just to keep the folks that are working on the release working on strictly the release. With regards to release branch management, the thing that we were focused on making sure was in place for this week was fast forwards and automated fast forwards, and Hannes got that going on a daily basis. So those are running in EMEA morning. Now the KEPs regarding packaging are moving forward, and that's going well. And please, if you have you know, thoughts on packaging and the distribution of packages, follow up on those KEPs. And that's pretty much all I have for release team update.
Thank you very much, Mike. Does anybody have questions, comments, concerns for Mike or the release team regarding that update?
Only that Mike did a great job. Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
My pleasure.
All right, so I popped a few things on the schedule before the meeting started. One of them is around Go 112. If there's anything we should do about it right now, I'll defer to Aaron and the release team to chat about that.
Sorry, which thing are we chatting about? I apologize.
Go 112.
Oh, okay. So I'll put it this way, like I personally don't have the time or bandwidth to take on Go to like try and get Go 112 to land. But if somebody out there wants to, I won't say no, unless it takes them to the end of the week to do it. And it's purely because I look to SIG scalability jobs to see if that's like actually, are the SIG scalability jobs green and generally stable to begin with? Because those are the longest lead time items. If they are, which they appear to be, then we could introduce this change and see if it drastically alters the performance. And hopefully it alters it in the right direction. If it doesn't, or things start to look flaky, we can revert this. This is not the sort of flail I would want to introduce immediately before code freeze though. So there's currently an outstanding issue, I will link in chat here, about attempting to look at all of the active versions of Kubernetes versus the versions of Go. I'm trying to figure out what is the best strategy going forward, like maybe trying to build older releases of Kubernetes with newer versions of Go and what the implications of that could look like. I'm not trying to boil the ocean or set in stone a policy for all things going forward. I'm just telling you what I, as the release lead, would use for my gut check for this thing. It's tight, it's close, it's risky. I would love to see something that's a little bit more planned and further out, but I also recognize that because of the relationship of Go's release cycle and Kubernetes release cycle, we can, if we're not careful, end up on versions of Go that are not supported, which isn't super fun. But it's up to the contributors to decide what to do. I'm just along for the ride.
So it sounds like the general feeling is we either do it ASAP or we wait. I think, so I had mentioned in the channel that like if we don't have some documented policy about this, we should probably look at drafting one. I think it's something that comes up every other cycle, if not every cycle, about doing something with Go. And it's usually somewhere around the, I'm not sure if we have time for this time frame. So the fact that it keeps coming up means we should have it documented.
If you want to document that policy, please go for it. If you want to wait for me to document a policy to make a decision, I'm going to block you, and that is a bad idea.
I'm not suggesting that either you or I, Aaron, should necessarily be the ones to document it, but we should have the discussion as a community and decide what the right move is.
Well, I'd actually suggest that one or both, or I guess myself, work with Hannes on perhaps demoing a pipeline for validating a Go version bump. I know that that's something that he's had on his plate, on Pivotal's plate more generally, and is perhaps in that sweet spot between often requested need and difficult to accomplish with other work. So we'd have something that's executable rather than just prose. Not that I don't love prose, but here it seems that there's more or less which the procedure you'd want to follow is something we should probably just implement or try to implement.
I also won't say no to that. My caveat is that in attempting to look for a documented policy here, the only thing I can find at the moment is that SIG Scalability has it in their charter that they need explicit approval on any large scale changes that could potentially impact the scalability of the project. So think of bumping the version of etcd, think of bumping the version of Golang, things of that nature. And for them to get a sign off usually involves spinning up a very expensive job that I don't know that they're willing to spin up clones of.
Well, yes, I guess so. I would consider the whole thing in scope. It's like creating a pipeline that allows you to show SIG scalability that a proposed bump is safe. I mean, this is all pretty standard stuff that we used at, in developing Cloud Foundry. So I have seen and been part of the delivery team responsible for producing such a pipeline. So I'm definitely confident that there are people at Pivotal who can help Hannes do some sort of preview that we can then evaluate for fitness. And also get the the process documented. So I think that we can actually voluntold Hannes here. I think it's nicely in the wheelhouse of things that he has expressed interest in wanting to do.
So I won't say no.
Yeah. So Hannes, since you're on the call, we'll let you chime in too.
Yeah, I'm happy to experiment with that. The only thing is that's that's not going to happen in this week.
Perfect.
So that would mean that we need to wait for 1.15 or whatever to do the upgrade, or we do it like in any other way this week.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug that it takes a bit of time to get this going and to get sign off from SIG Scalability on whatever we're doing here.
Okay, well, that's fair, but then I agree with Hannes. Like, it either has to land in the next couple of days or it doesn't land until next release.
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting is that we just decide that it's not landing until next release and approach the problem and with the mindset of doing something that's automatable for 117.
To clarify, when we say next release, do we mean 115 or a patch
Yes.
release?
115.
Yeah.
Or, well, whatever comes out of that issue that I linked, because again, there's discussion about now that Go 112 has been released, earlier versions of Kubernetes are built on an unsupported version of Go. Surprise! So we probably need to figure out what we want to do about that. And right now that issue is proposing that we bump every version of Kubernetes up to the latest version of Go.
So hold on, older versions of Kubernetes or older currently supported versions of Kubernetes?
Older currently supported versions of Kubernetes.
Okay.
Kubernetes 111 and 112 were built with Go 110, which is now unsupported because Go 112 has been released.
Well, we know the precedent for this is KGO, like KDEP.
I mean, actually, I don't know what you mean by that. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
We use a GoDep fork for dependency management, and that's now a thing that's in scope for Go itself. Our own fork.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not super concerned about the practical consequences for people. I have a hard time believing that a supported version of Kubernetes, given I guess our own commercial obligations, don't allow us or a Red Hat, IBM, or VMware to walk away from customers who are still using a supported version of Kubernetes, which I imagine is the majority of folks. I guess I would like to avoid the world or policy that would prevent us from consuming new like Go functionality if we have to ensure that previously released source code compiles with the new Go compiler. I would love for that either to be the Go problem, the problem to the Go language team, or something we just don't address.
So Caleb, since you're in the release engineering subproject as one of the owners, I would encourage you to go comment and share your opinion on that issue, because I feel like deciding on this issue is under the purview of the release engineering subproject. My scope is just literally this release. And I'm saying if somebody wants to give it a shot, I'm supportive of them giving it a shot for this release of Kubernetes, but only if it lands in the next couple of days.
So I think that we're in the place where we're saying that it's not going to land in a couple of days. So let's say it's punted to 115 and call it a day.
I don't think we're in that place because I see people discussing on that issue who are not in this call. So,
well, I guess I can say as an owner of the release engineering subproject, my vote is that we're delaying. We're not addressing this in this release. If you need more support than that, let me know. I am happy to throw whatever process hammer you believe you need.
I'd like that documented in that, just like make sure you document your decision in that issue.
Sounds good.
Where's the issue, by the way?
I linked it in Zoom chat.
Okay, cool.
I can put it in the meeting notes.
Thank you.
Oh, you put it in the template. That's great.
All right. All right. So next, are we good there before we move on? All right. Sounds good. So next topic is patch release team comms. So Tim Pepper opened up an issue around having a singular contact point for the patch release team. I have actually created a mailing list when we were starting to talk about the patch release team that I believe already has Tim and Alexandra and a few other people on it. So I will comment on that issue. I think it's Kubernetes patch release management at Google Groups, something like that. But I'll find it, comment on that issue and get that wrapped up. Any questions there?
A comment, is it possible to use a email alias for discourse rather than Google Groups?
I'm not opposed to it. I don't have strong opinions either way. I also am like you are part of the release engineering, and patch release team falls under their purview. So if you feel that that's more appropriate, that's totally fine with me. Even if it's, I wonder if we do a combination of both the Google group and then the discourse list as part of that. I'm not sure if that's possible technically, but
I think I would like to avoid splitting the channels, but I mean, I'm I guess hesitant of taking a further dependency on Google Groups, given that it doesn't work in China, and we care about that now. So that's at least my 2 cents there.
yeah, sure. All right. So also, anyone who wants to take notes, please feel free to jump in. Let me.
Well, I guess you can just say for the note taker, just Caleb says no. It's a solid summary of all my contributions.
All right. I will put notes in it after the meeting. We'll we'll have to update the issue as well, just to capture that. So Jeff, on the release notes, I know you had wanted to talk about that. So
I would. So first time caller, many time listener. I've never actually hopped onto a SIG release call, so hello. I am one of the release notes shadows for 114. And I have come to preach about release notes and why I think they could be a lot better. So it's going to make a lot more sense if I share my screen. So fair warning, you're about to see a screen share. So these are the release notes for 113. When you think about release notes, they should be end user focused. In my opinion, we are telling our end users what is changing in Kubernetes. We aren't necessarily informing them of internal things that are happening. So security content makes sense. Urgent upgrade notes, I would hope we put that on blast for all of the end users. Known issues, deprecations, that's fine. Major themes. I would like to talk about.
So
Sorry,
Jeff,
go ahead.
one question before you continue. What is your definition of end user?
End user is my day job, which is I maintain Kubernetes clusters for the University of Michigan for research. So an end user of Kubernetes, an end user that is currently consuming Kubernetes like clusters.
Clusters, applications, development for Kubernetes. I think in our context, those can all be in scope for end user.
Yeah.
And they have different requirements. I just wanted to set that frame before continuing.
Yeah,
that is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
The general assertions that the release notes that we currently generate are not useful by people not intimately involved with the delivery of the enhancement is a problem, I guess is the framing that I would use. Yeah.
One of the things that I want to talk about is major themes. I am all for, let me put it this way. For most of the SIGs, and I'm using 113 as a good example, most of the SIG themes are the equivalent of a quarterly update for what they did during the release cycle, not necessarily for the 113 release. And I will pick on myself. The migration of the newest version of Angular is still under active development. This has nothing to do with 113, but like the release notes team solicited SIG UI to give themes for 113. Another wonderful example of themes that don't make sense, SIG Big Data focused on community engagements. So what I was thinking of, so part of my rant is twofold. The first part is, why do we have themes when they don't have anything to do with the actual release? Should release notes just be specific to what is in the the release? And why are we collecting themes when they're essentially a one paragraph write-up of what most SIGs do during the community meeting, which is tell people what they've done for the last 3 to 4 months?
So I think, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say that's part one, and that's where that's a wonderful break to have a conversation.
So this has been quite a conversation. I think that we've had it a little bit in SIG PM today. Last 2 weeks ago in SIG release around out of tree handling, right, and how SIGs can present information. My overall feeling is that the release notes and the changelog for Kubernetes is not the appropriate place for this. The problem that we have is there isn't currently an alternative presentation mechanism for that, right? So to Aaron's point earlier, they were thinking maybe is the blog the right place for people to do this? And to Caleb's point from the SIG release call 2 weeks ago, the ability to or the privilege to be able to put your notes in this changelog is exactly that, right? It's a privilege, right? It's not a right. The expectation should be for people to give us the information ahead of time, right? Release notes, docs, whoever should not be tracking you down to try to figure out how to collate this stuff in time for the release. And if it's out of scope, it should not be here. I think that was the general agreement. I think we need to codify that as policy. There is a issue open that I will link in the notes. Give me a second.
Fantastic.
So I guess I can provide some historical context here, since I introduced the idea of a majors theme section to the release notes. This predates the process by which SIGs provided their quarterly updates in the community meeting. It also was an attempt to address the fact that the release notes attached to pull requests are themselves not high enough quality to present in what I would consider to be a high quality change log or release notes product. I think as it relates to I guess the organization, I would look to, and I have looked to, projects like Fedora for inspiration. So if you look at Fedora's release notes, it is, for each version of Fedora, there are sections that are relevant for each of the personas that the project has identified that are relevant there. So, desktop users, sysadmins, developers, etc. And so the major theme section was an attempt to create something similar, where SIG would be able to give a summary of the pull request that went into the release. Now, we have definitely drifted from that ideal. And so we're now at the position of trying to decide what to do now. I think there's still a lot of value in providing those summaries of what happened. But I also agree that it's not useful to duplicate that with the update to the community meeting. And that the changelog we have needs more, more long-term editorial support. And I would love to talk with anyone about, trying to provide that kind of staffing long-term, at least from where we've come. So I guess those are my notes on how we got to this particular place.
I think one of the things that's puzzling me about this is when I hear that we're going to have themes for the release and in the release notes, what I expect to see there is something like, SIG API machinery, server-side apply, push through 7 enhancements designed to support server-side apply. That is stuff that's actually in the release, and I'm looking for the theme section to supply me with some sort of big picture view over the 300 lines of individual enhancements.
Right, exactly. It's like some framing context. I think I would even, at least as I think about it, it's even a higher level than that. It's like the themes I expect to see are improved control plane stability with server-side apply listed as one of those enhancements. Because I want to see, that all the SIGs, or that many of the SIGs, are working, say, on a stability development theme, as it's pertinent to that individual SIG. So I'd like also to see from SIG node additional, refactoring of Heapster to support additional metrics out of kubelet that are all part of improving the operational experience of running a Kubernetes cluster. And so I would like to see SIG PM most likely as the source of these development themes, as kind of serving in their role as cross-project coordination, not necessarily now the SIGs coming up with the themes themselves, because that, I agree, has not proven to work, at least as intended.
I love all of that.
All right. I've had my
go ahead.
hand raised. I can respond. So I feel like the release themes can't. I said this in the release team meeting on Monday, I guess, and to say what I said in SIG PM again, Caleb, I share that aspiration, but this is open source. I have yet to find anybody who can say, "Thou shalt do this," and everybody goes and does it. In fact, I believe it's explicitly written in SIG PM's charter that SIG PM doesn't have the authority to say that.
Yes. Some of this, I guess I can let the cat out of the bag. Part of the work in the KEP process is to provide the tooling required that allows the release team to gate the submit queue. So if you imagine a world where that exists, you can extend that gating higher in the project if you would so desire. So that, if assuming one can gate pull request landing based on whether or not a KEP exists for that pull request that describes that pull request or that gives the context for it, I think that it's not a huge leap to imagine a world where the type of or that attributes of that KEP itself aid in that or taken into account in those gating decisions. And that's something we can roll out gradually as a project. But I guess my approach has been to provide to work on the processes that will hopefully all dovetail and allow the release that first give the release team additional control over the rate of change to the project. And then after that, to work with the project-wide groups like PM and architecture to move that gating off of the shoulders of the release team. Like, it needs to occur earlier, but it needs to also be possible to gate at the release. So I think starting there is a reasonable thing to do.
Okay, so I appreciate and hear all of that, but if I can just finish without getting interrupted. So SIG-PM's charter, or at least their README, currently says, we cannot set schedules, we cannot dictate features to SIGs, we cannot set headcount, which means that SIG-PM can't take a set of themes from the top and push them down through the project. And so what happens with release notes is that we start at the bottom and we try and read all of the individual PRs and commits. And maybe some of those PRs have one line release notes. And then from there, we try and synthesize those into, oh wait, maybe some of these are linked to these things called enhancements. And maybe some of these PRs also come from SIGs. And so we'll ask the SIGs hey, of all of these PRs, what are the most important things? And maybe some of these things are the enhancements over here. And what I feel has evolved over time is we've done this work of asking everything of SIGs from a content perspective, but then we've never actually mapped, reduced the map, so to speak. We've never actually given somebody the authority or editorial voice or whatever to say, no, this isn't important. I don't care about this. That's this whole process started. I first witnessed it when Eric Toon was the person who paged everything into his brain, and then I did it, and then you did it, and it's kind of progressed from there and grown into this monstrosity. And at some point, I feel the release notes people or the docs people felt like they didn't have the authority to say these things, because in essence, the release notes is kind of reverse engineering the lack of project management and trying to make up a story that pretends as if there was project management from the get-go, reverse engineering the narrative that's typed out by an army of monkeys that's riding on a herd of cats. That's what release notes is. And I want to give them as much power and authority as they can to do that. So just forgetting all the tooling and stuff for a second, if it's purely from do the humans have the ability to do the thing, I fully support release notes removing anything they feel isn't relevant, and making release notes something that is intended to be read by users, rather than something that is intended to be produced by the contributors.
Yeah, and I totally agree. But I mean, I guess we have both sat in rooms together where, as the collection of Kubernetes contributors, we have all decided that we are going to have a stability theme for a release. What I guess I am saying is that after doing this a couple times and not having that be the final product, it is my assertion now that it is because we have no way of enforcing that requirement or that agreement amongst ourselves with any sort of tooling. So that even though we agreed as humans, and that in theory allows an individual, once selected, to remind the group of that power, it has not been, it is not, well, I am arguing we need additional tools that help that person wield that responsibility.
I agree with that. Everything you and I and Stephen and other people here have been doing is all in an effort to try and put in guide rails and improve the stability of Kubernetes over time. I was merely trying to make the point that themes are not this top-down thing that push. Themes are this thing that organically happen, that are humans trying to reverse engineer themes and cluster like things together. And this is what we started when we met with Natasha and Caitlin to start talking about from a communications and marketing perspective. How are we going to describe the shape of this release? Setting aside stability as something we should constantly be striving for, like what are the top 3 things that I can say that this release offers, right? And so I want to give the release notes people the ability to say that, not to have to like weigh everybody's input equally and try to give everybody fair time. Look, I'm fine for an editorial voice to be a dictatorial voice. I'm really okay with it.
Right. I guess I believe that we can in fact push down themes top down. I think that certainly that is defining the scope of what Kubernetes is, which I hope is something we revisit on a release by release, really continuous basis, is in the purview of SIG architecture. And so if they can't, then I don't understand really what the purpose of that SIG is, if they are not able to define what Kubernetes is on a continuous basis. I think that that definition of what Kubernetes is should inform what development themes are. I mean, so I do believe that if we are successful in, managing the project, we will be able at some point to have themes flow from a group like SIG architecture or SIG PM, not that is just dictating unilaterally what people should work on, but is able to help guide the project by informing what we should be working on, where we should be focusing our energies. And I plan, or I hope, to support that process by incentivizing the participants to participate. So that's what I'm talking about by like getting the submit queue. If you cannot have your pull request merged, then I think it's pretty obvious that you will need to conform to the process that allows your pull request to be merged if you care. If you don't care, then there's really no problem. But I think that we are now at the point where we need to be thinking about how can tooling help us to execute or discharge the responsibilities that have been entrusted to us.
So since we only have 4 minutes, can I go into part 2? Because it has to do with tooling, though mildly unrelated.
We've got 19 minutes, by the way. So.
Oh, it goes till 5:45 my time.
Keep going. Come on.
All right, then I did not mean to interrupt. Please continue.
I know.
So I want to say 2 releases ago, Mike, you tell me, but Mike wrote an awesome Golang tool that outputs the release notes. And one of the things I noticed when I was going through it was it not only outputs Markdown, it outputs JSON. And then I had an idea, and then the idea turned into a weekend project that turned into, let's make a website that has all the release notes. Because in an ideal world, and again, I'm thinking from a sysadmin, I'm managing a Kubernetes cluster type world. If I'm going from, say, 112.1 to 114, what all changed that I care about? So being able to actually filter based on the technology or the specific areas would be kind of neat and nice, and also let people search on stuff. This is literally just taking the raw JSON out of Mike's tool and then just dumping it into a little API that you can search on, and then we do the things. So this was, again, just a weekend project. I'm not sure if I should continue doing the thing with it or not, if there's any interest, if it seems cool. I showed it at the release team meeting and people seemed kind of happy about it, but I want to see if there's other interest elsewhere in the greater release SIG release team.
So I like staring at it right now. This is actually something that I would love to see for KEPs too. There are talks about like how to present KEPs in a way that is like easy to sort, and this is close to, I mean, this is at least something of what it could look like, right? Being able to filter by SIGs or the participating SIGs, different things like that. I like it. Like if it's a matter of like figuring out how to make it more human readable, yeah, this is a step in the right direction.
Any other feedback from anybody?
I'm a fan of this idea.
Yep. Is this something you could potentially use an intern on?
Potentially. I mean, again, this was a like no joke Friday afternoon. I noticed that Mike's tool output JSON, and then I went through the process my brain goes through. Like I haven't thought anything past what I've done. So, I mean,
well, just we have outreach interns coming up. We have Google Summer of Code coming up, that sort of thing. So, looking at it, for the next release cycle, we could potentially have an intern turn this into a little bit more of a tool if you'd be interested in mentoring them.
I guess as it relates to this particular tool, I think we could I think there's a lot to be gained by improving the general quality of both the KEPs and the release notes. So I spent a lot of time with our SRE team, and we essentially have to spin up a team every quarter to go through these release notes and track down a bunch of pertinent information that an operator would care about, like how do I know this enhancement is working? How do I know it's not working? What metrics are injected in the system? What dependencies on other components of the system are required for this component to work? And that needs to go into a larger document that is part of the KEP in my mind. And so, there's the first part about getting that living in a place, because you probably need to iterate on that as you're going into development process. So I think that creating a home for that, having someone continually improve the content there is one place that needs where someone like yourself could be really helpful. Another place is the release notes content itself, which also needs to increase in terms of, I guess, understandability, to not, throw unnecessary shade on contributors here. So I think that those are two places where there's a lot of, value for not all that much effort. So those are just kind of how I see the challenge currently. That it's a content problem as much as it is a tooling problem.
I do want to say though that this has a lot of metadata marked up on it and looks pretty useful for filtering through it. I definitely think we should adopt something like this, or like somewhat orthogonally to the other things that we should do.
One of the things I'll note is, like I said in the background, this is just a JSON file that gets output from Mike's tool. And the reason I kind of built it like that is a database seems a little heavyweight, even if we have like 30 releases worth of release notes. But B, that means that those release notes are in a Git repo. So we can continually be able to improve them. Someone could go through and add more metadata, and then we can support said metadata. That was kind of my thinking behind that. So that kind of piggybacks off of the comment about metadata.
Yeah, I just want to chime in real quick. Sorry, I just want to chime in real quick. Is Jeff, this is awesome. And I think when you look at it from like a double click point of view, you get a lot of great data in here. Coming from a past of where I've had to sit there and look at the enhancements and try to track, okay, well, what happened in 113 versus 114? What's in 115? I know you're probably not accepting feature requests already, but it's like if we can even map these to the enhancements, the enhancement tracking, like then you have almost like a higher level overview, and then you double click into it, and then you get this granular component to it. So it's really cool, and there's a lot of great information in here.
As it relates to tooling, I guess I would suggest that you, Mike, Jeff, and Kendrick, you should work on a time where I can give you a walkthrough of where we are with the KEP tooling, in order to not, I guess, be duplicative, because there's a lot. I guess you'll see, or you'll have opinions when we sync, to see what the gap there is and where you'd like to invest your efforts. So ping me on Slack if we could find some time to sync up.
Is there a chance that we could do that demo at a SIG so we can have it recorded? I feel like it would make sure that we don't have a bunch of people pinging you individually.
Yes.
It means we have something we could reuse.
Yeah, so this is really just a walkthrough, less of a demo, kind of where we're going. But yes, once there's a demo, yeah, the recording and presenting that out is going to be a key part of actually getting the KEP content iterated on or moved to the next format. But this, given that you have interest in improving the state of things, specifically for the release process, I think I'm fine doing just the one on few kind of syncs, at least at this stage. But yes, Aaron, definitely, that is a plan.
Okay.
So given that, Jeff, can you put this up in an issue for tracking? At least I want to make sure that we're not just talking about it, but we're also capturing it somewhere.
Definitely. Probably won't be till tomorrow morning, fair warning, but I'll get it done in the morning.
Yeah, all good. All right.
Thank you for letting me crash your party.
Happy to have you. It's your party too. All right, so I'm going to try to speed through this. Well, I mean, there's not really anything to speed through. The last two items are 115 planning and enhancement. 115 enhancements and comms, right? So 115 planning, all I wanted to say is if you are on the release team, if you are a release team role lead or the release team lead shadows, you should start considering the succession plan. We would want to start getting that train rolling for release team selection once code freeze starts hitting. So keep that in mind. Think about your shadows and who's been performing really well, who's well suited to the job, who you think should carry the baton moving forward. That's really it on that point. From a enhancements perspective, we were discussing this earlier today in SIG PM, and it's my feeling that both the enhancements lead and the communications coordinator roles on the release team are extensions of SIG PM, and they're liaisons to the release team as opposed to being staffed from SIG Release. So my feeling is for 115, I'd like to move the staffing for enhancements and for communications into SIG PM as opposed to from the release team perspective. I'll still be looking at the people who have been shadowing and of course syncing with the people who are currently those role leads to get feedback on who best and what we can be doing to improve the process overall there. But this kind of leads into making sure that the enhancements lead and the communications coordinator are actually in tune with SIG PM, since they're kind of the ones carrying the message for the release cycle. One other suggestion that we had was, not suggestion, but iterative improvement, is moving away from enhancement tracking issues and into enhancement tracking PRs, right? So being able to codify the means that people submit changes for a release, right, and capturing that in a repo. So it goes through an approval process, right, where we can easily aggregate the list of things that are supposed to land in the release, and a human doesn't have to do that. So Caleb and Aaron were mentioning this in the SIG PM meeting. I think it's a great idea. Feel free to discuss questions, comments, concerns. Go for it.
I don't think that I guess I'm not quite sure what it means to move staffing out of SIG release. I still think that it's the primary responsibility of the release manager to ensure, well, really it's ultimately it's responsibility of the us chairs to ensure that a release team is staffed. But once there is a release manager, I think we should continue with the previous art whereby the release manager is ultimately responsible for accepting people onto the release team. Now, I would think that those people primarily should have spent most of their time in SIG PM, but I guess I'm not convinced that any changing of the language we have is helpful in that effort. Like, yeah, I expect people to generally have, be product or program managers, but I think that keeping the release team staffing holistic is valuable.
So I have a random opinion that I think is a little related to that and may drag us off topic, but so I agree. One of the strengths of the release team is that it is all contributors can show up and help out. That's what generated a thunderous amount of interest when we publicized the fact that we had a survey for release team shadows. Now, I'll be honest, as the release team lead, this was way more people and a much higher level of interest than I was comfortable with. And today, I still don't even know if it's actually effective. Like, I had no way of vetting the sheer volume of people that were coming in. I really liked the level of interest, but I don't actually know who's doing what. And like, of the people who showed up and said they wanted to help and then bounced away, like what we can do about that. So I would just kind of be mindful of that as you look to select the next release team. For all I know, like this has worked out super well for each of the release team roles. And like they have found a bunch of shadows that they like and they want to work with, and that's super great. But just from my comfort level, like I'm not used to having 7 people on fulfilling a role. Like that's too many people for me to gel with. I personally feel as though, with the exception of a select few people, I haven't really had the opportunity to storm, form, and norm with my team. And I don't actually feel super gelled because there are like 30 people who show up all the time. Just a random thing, like if we're gonna do the questionnaire again, when are we gonna have the questionnaire ready by? Will that work? Should we put barriers on the number of people who show up and help out? Things like that. But again, this is just me being a curmudgeon. Like I voted with my feet. I didn't use a questionnaire. I talked to my shadows personally. I interviewed them personally and just went that route and let the rest of it proceeded however it may. And so for all I know, this has worked wonderfully for all of you. I just felt the need to share my opinion or speak up because that's how it's worked for me. And I'd love to be shouted down with like nothing but praise for the way the process worked for everybody else.
So I popped a link into the chat that is a issue about the release team survey improvements. To Aaron's point, if you think we should not do the survey again, if you think there are things that we should fix about it, if you feel like there were too many people coming at you. I know for, I know personally that, as the person who's gone like, hey, the survey is available, like the PM's DMs are constant, right? Or going, hey, do we have an update on how we're staffing CI Signal? I'm like, I don't know, I'm not the person doing it, right? So like the process overall can be overwhelming. I think like even doing the tracking issue and trying to follow up with everyone who's available or interested in that is difficult in and of itself. So like if there are improvements for this process before we get the train rolling again, the release team, like you should feel that it is your responsibility as a release team to suggest improvements for that process. You're the ones who are going through it, and will, you know, and your shadows will be going through it next cycle as they pick people. So please give feedback. I only have so much context spinning up some of these things. So
yeah, the weird thing for me is like, so I was an active participant in 113 as the release lead shadow. So I kind of didn't have time to like super pay attention to all of this because we were heads down putting 113 out the door. And I will be in a similar situation now as the release lead. I would like to help, but it's kind of difficult for me to concentrate on this stuff.
No, I'm saying not you as the release lead, but the release team. It is everyone's responsibility to help out with this. You know, I think that, you know, I mean, that's part of the reason I bring this up before you jump into code freeze, right? We've got a month and change out from the release, and I think it's enough time to give some consideration about how the process can be improved moving forward.
Well, yes, but you know, as chairs, it is, I guess, our ultimate responsibility to shepherd long-term improvements. So I can understand, you know, until, you know, release day plus probably 3 or 4 to drain from the stress of getting the release out the door as the release manager, to not really expect any participation there.
That's fair, but as chairs, we are also responsible for being the voice of the release teams and the associated sub-projects, right? So we want to make, I say that to say, I want to make sure that your voice is counted in the decisions that we make or try to make. So if you have opinions on this process and ways to improve the process, we want to know about it.
And I think I guess I heard a couple in there. One, it would be helpful to have additional descriptions of the requirements required to be successful in the role, and perhaps some way of allowing candidates to provide that information, you know, like a CV, as if there was another normal kind of job interview, before they engage with a release team lead who is already oversubscribed with responsibilities. So I think that at least creating a process or improving the documentation such that exists around release team roles and kind of like spitballing some initial process around or requirements for providing, you know, a collection of your experience in the project is a reasonable thing for us to be involved in.
I really think we have a pretty good system now where people come in and shadow, and then eventually someone that shadowed typically goes in and does the roles.
Yeah.
I think maybe the problem is that we're having everyone involved in all the things, including the shadows, and that's maybe overwhelming for someone like Aaron. I don't think we need to add any more process to becoming a shadow. And I think we're actually kind of like super excited with process all the time, and that's off-putting to people trying to come in and do work for us.
Well, I guess we are trying to specifically limit a bit of that enthusiasm, or temper it a bit with some reasonable requirements that shows that you are capable of fulfilling this role, because there's overhead to evaluate people's fitness for a role. And I mean, I agree. I mean, it is great to see how successful the shadow process has been. It's just that it seems that we are now, once again, our interest is exceeding our ability to manage it.
So what we did this cycle is we let each lead pick their shadows, and they picked the amount that they thought they could handle, and that varied by the role. And I would say, talking to the other shadows and leads, that it seems like that's been pretty successful, and they've gotten a lot of help from a lot of people who might not have even necessarily had any experience yet at all.
Okay, so how about we do this, since we've gone 2 minutes over. We park this discussion. Let's go to the people, the release team. we will show up for some release team meeting and have a discussion about how we can improve the process moving forward. Sounds good, everyone?
I would keep this in a SIG release meeting, not a release team meeting, which should be focused on the mechanics of getting the release out the door. So this seems like a great discussion to have here, just I guess next time or the time after that.
Yeah, my ask would be that the people on the release team are able to show up and lend their opinion to the discussion as well. So I don't want to speak for a larger group of people. Like we have some people here, but not everyone, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And to Josh's point, not suggesting like a blanket process that prevents people from signing up or participating in a shadow rule. Just guidance that allows you, or one as a release team lead, to evaluate the fitness of potential shadows. Just aids to help you make those decisions. Because yeah, if I believe that we needed a radically different mechanism for staffing, I would have helped to create that. But I helped create the shadow process, so that's what we got. So obviously, I believe in its goodness and its general philosophical underpinning.
All right. So with that, we will bid you all adieu. Thank you for showing up. Wait.
Just say one
Sorry.
thing?
Yeah. Go for it, Aaron. Yeah.
I will make room for you at the next release team meeting on Monday. It's different from the half-hour burn down meetings that happen on other days. Show up Monday. I will make room for you.
Gotcha.
Hey, and real quick, sorry. I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I've been kicking down the survey. I was going to look for your feedback. Do you want me to hold off on that? Kick it down the road a little bit longer until we discuss that internally?
You were still assigned to it, I believe. So
yep.
Yeah. You can keep holding it.
Sounds good. We'll talk.
All right. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.
Bye.